For 40 years the children of Israel had wandered in the wilderness, and for 39 of those years the tabernacle had been the centrepiece of their camp, the focus point of the Israelites' worship and service. After all those years of going from place to place, the time finally came when God brought them into the promised land. At last the wilderness days were over, and the people of God could look forward to a new era of settled rest. So they entered the land, but the house of God wasn't left behind in the desert. The Ark of the Covenant had always gone out at the front of the procession as the Israelites walked through the desert, and it was no different when they came to the river Jordan to cross over into Canaan. Behold, Joshua said to the people, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. When the Israelites entered the land, God still wanted his house to be central to the people which he'd chosen for himself. The tabernacle was set up in Shiloh, right in the middle of the land, as an expression of God's desire that the house of God should remain central to the service of his people. God always remembered the importance of Shiloh. So many years later, in the days of Jeremiah, he said, "My place was in Shiloh, where I made my name to dwell at the first." My place, my name. God had chosen a place to dwell in, and there he'd fixed his name. Nowhere else would do. God wanted his people to come and to worship him there. It wasn't in God's plan to go to them in all their different places and with all their different ways of doing things. They were to do things his way. And so at any one time there was only ever one place where God chose to put his name, and they were to come to him in that place. Right back in the days of Moses, he'd made that so clear to the Israelites when he told them, "You shall seek the Lord at the place which the Lord your God will choose from all your tribes, to establish his name there for his dwelling, and there you shall come." And there they did come. 3 times in every year, all the men of Israel were to make their journey to the place where God had set his name. And they would bring sacrifices and offerings to him, just as each one was able to give. The house of God was still central to the service of his people, still so precious to God in the way he wanted to be served. Years later, when the conquest of Jerusalem was complete and Israel had secured rest from all its enemies, the heart of King David was greatly moved that, for all David's riches, God still dwelt in a tent. David had in mind to build for God a permanent house in Jerusalem, but God's desire was different. God honoured David's intention. He even called him a man after my own heart. But David, a man of war, was only permitted to make the preparations for the new temple. The building of it would be left to his son, Solomon. After 7 years of building, the new temple was completed upon Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and the glory of the Lord filled the place. God set his name there, and from that day on, even until the Lord Jesus himself came to dwell amongst the people of Israel, it was to Mount Zion that the people would go to worship God. At long last, God had a permanent place, a glorious house raised up in the midst of his people. He was there, his name was there, and he commanded his people to come and to serve him there. The Lord Jesus didn't miss out on that responsibility. God's well-beloved Son answered the call and came to Jerusalem in obedience to his Father. John's Gospel records that the Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem he went to the temple, and there he cast out the money changers and the merchants who had turned the house of God into a place of business. To the Lord Jesus, the house of his God was so important, so precious, because he knew just how precious it was to his Father. He knew so well the value that God put on that place. At Calvary, when they rejected him, they rejected his Father who dwelt among them. When they broke his body upon the cross, God took the heavy veil which separated the holy place from the most holy place in the temple and tore it in two from the top to the bottom. God was in that place no more. It was now Israel's house, and God had left it to them, desolate, And so the days of God's physical house upon the earth came to an end on the day the world crucified his Son. It was an end to the material house in the midst of a physical people on the earth. But it wasn't the end of God's desire to have a dwelling place amongst a people obedient to him. With the new covenant came about a new order of things, a better day in which God would still have his house, and in which he would still call his faithful servants to come and worship him in the place where he would put his name. In the purposes of God, that pattern of old, of a material house in the midst of a physical people, was about to progress into something altogether more wonderful.